Is Flory Bidunga about to be a star for KU? We preview the KU center big man position on today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here at D Johnson Radio on Twitter, and this is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show, whether you get it on our YouTube page, which you can like and subscribe to, or anywhere that you get your audio side of things for free. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the show. We're going to be breaking down the big man position for KU on today's episode of the show, previewing the center spot and a little bit of the 4-5 men for KU, and then we'll also finish up with a little where KU football ranks compared to the rest of the Big 12 by Pro Football Focus grades, and where some of the individuals rank in terms of some of that stuff. Before we get into any of that, today's episode of the show is brought to you by Monarch Money. And with Monarch Money, you can take control of your finances. Use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year with Monarch Money. Okay, so Flory Bidunga certainly leads the big man spot for KU. He is the guy you were circling as saying, okay, he should be the best player among your big men, and he is somebody who has the potential to break out into being a star player. I think we saw it in flashes and saw it at times a season ago, like whether it was individual plays like the steal and the dunk at UCF. I think he had another one of those. I forget if it was a block and a dunk or steal and a dunk. Just some of the fun dunks in general, or some of the blocks he would have, some of his switchability on the defensive end when he was on the ball. But you also saw some of the moments where you said, okay, yeah, this guy is still a freshman. Like, he still is learning. He's going to get better, but there are going to be some moments like you would see him get lost sometimes off the ball. And part of that was, KU at times was playing 2, sometimes even 3 big lineups. So Flory's going to be playing positions that he's not going to be playing as much on this year's team. If we're comparing last year's big man spot, Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams, Flory Bidunga, and Zach Clements, to this year's crop of big men, which is Flory Bidunga, Paul Mbiya, and Bryson Tiller, I think it's funny because in a vacuum, if you're just comparing players to players, you would actually say last year's crop winds up being better, because you say, okay, well, this year has Flory, last year had Flory. You would say, okay, well, Hunter Dickinson is more of a proven productive offensive player and scorer than anybody on this year's roster. KJ Adams, for some of the faults on what it led to offensively, was still a good passer and was arguably the best defender on the team. And then you wind up in a situation where you're comparing that to this year's team, and it's like, okay, I think Flory could be a stud, but let's say Flory is an all Big 12 player. Well, that's what you had with Hunter. Is Paul Mbiya or Bryson Tiller, how ready are they going to be? But even though you can make that comparison, and if you're just making it in a vacuum, you would say, okay, well, I don't know. If we're talking about the fit to the team, you could, at the same point in time, make the argument this year's big men are actually going to have more value, more like of a push on winning to the team, if that makes sense. Because there were times where it did feel like with Hunter Dickinson, he was putting up numbers, but how impactful was it when, you're going down and getting an easy bucket, but then they're targeting you at the other end and getting a bucket because of it, right? And with Flory, it's a little more universal on both ends of the floor. And while with Hunter, if you were able to maximize it in a better way than Kansas ended up doing, if Kansas would have been able to put more shooting around Hunter as opposed to, playing basically a bunch of 2 and sometimes even 3 big lineups, it could have worked a lot better. And Hunter Dickinson, his first year at Michigan, they go to an Elite 8. They had a couple like 3 and D NBA wings. If you could, isolate it that way and work around him in the right way, you could really have taken advantage of that. But unfortunately, you weren't able to do that. And so because you weren't able to do that, it left you in a situation where instead of you putting the perfect pieces around Hunter, you were stuck in a situation where defensively you had to scramble for the perfect pieces around Hunter. And so KJ actually became a good fit next to Hunter on the defensive end, even if it was a bad fit on the offensive end. Well, with this year's team, again, this is where these big men come in. I think it becomes easier, and this is also where the rest of the roster construction comes in. But sometimes big men can just be they're they're the final variable in the long equation, sometimes where it's like, if you are in, and maybe they're the first variable, because sometimes if you have a certain big man, you have to play a certain way. But that's the beauty of these big men, that with the guys you currently have, you could play in a lot of different ways of how you want to. And I look at the switchability potential defensively. I look at the shot blocking ability of Flory and then Paul Mbiya behind him. I look at the wingspan of all three of these guys, and it just becomes a better defensive foundation for you and makes things a lot easier for Bill Self in game planning defensively, for the rest of the guards and going for steals and trying to make plays in that way. And I just think it's going to make it for a much easier job for Bill Self defensively. Now, the question will become offensively, because you don't have that go-to scorer with Hunter Dickinson. Are you able to make up for it in other ways? And are these guys still able to score in enough of a way? So I do think it's just kind of an interesting conversation there. Now, when we do talk about Flory Bidunga, you're talking about somebody who, back in 2023, he measured 6'7" without shoes. So I think KU lists him at 6'10", probably closer to with shoes, 6'8.5", 6'9". We'll call him 6'9", but a 7'2" wingspan. So that's the more important part, right? You'd rather have somebody with a 7'2" wingspan who's 6'9" than you would have somebody who's 6'11" with a 6'11" wingspan. At least I would personally, right? Because you block shots with your hands, you throw down dunks with your arms, right? And hands, right? But I don't know, maybe KU site is saying that he grew, and that would be even better for Flory Bidunga. And he obviously has awesome jumping ability for a big man his size too. So that 7'2" is not a plodding 7'2", it's a 7'2" that's going to jump out of the gym. You look at last year's stats: 34 games played, 6 games started, 16.3 minutes per game, 5.9 points, 5.4 rebounds, 0.3 assists, 0.6 steals, 1.6 blocks per game on 70% from the field. But what's interesting is, it would be easy to say, okay, well, if you're trying to factor out like what could his numbers look like as a starter, you would just say, okay, take, his minutes per game, 16. If you figure he'll be around 25, so take half of what he produced, and you'd be coming around at that point, like 9 points, 8 rebounds per game, 2.5 blocks per game, which would all be very good numbers. But we know the longer you're in there, there is a bit of diminishing returns in terms of just how efficient you can be, so to speak. Like, if you take one shot a game, it's going to be much easier to register a higher efficiency number or a very low efficiency number as opposed to one in the middle, if that sort of makes sense. But he did register those 6 games as a starter, and that's where you can point to and say, okay, if he's going to be a starter, what's he going to look like this year? Well, in those 6 games he started last year, 25 minutes per game, which, funny enough, that might be around what he ends up averaging this year. Maybe it ends up being more. Maybe that's a sign that if he played 25 minutes per game as a starter last year, maybe it will be closer to 28 to 30 minutes per game this year. But in 25 last year, 8.2 points per game, 6.7 rebounds per game, 1.2 assists per game, 0.8 steals, and 2 blocks per game on 73% from the field. But also keep in mind that was mainly as a 4-man. He was starting next to Hunter Dickinson. So it's not as easy to say, hey, you can expect those to be the numbers for Flory this year, because that's what he did last year as a starter. Maybe you give a little bit of boost, assuming he's going to get a little better, and you'd say 9, 10 points, 7, 7.5, 8 rebounds, 2.5, 3 blocks per game. And maybe that is what he averages. Those would be very solid numbers for KU. But again, you're taking away some of the spacing, you're taking away some of the rebounding ability by playing him next to Hunter Dickinson. And from that perspective, I think, to me, the numbers I'm more so looking at is like 10 to 12 points per game, 8 to 10 rebounds per game, 2.5 to 3 blocks per game on 65, 70, maybe even 75% from the field. And those are all Big 12 level numbers. If you end up being one of the best teams in the country, that's all American level numbers. It just depends where the impact goes with the stats. But I think the position and role on the team, this is a bit of an easier one. He is your starting center. He's probably your most impactful defender. We'll see if he ends up being your best defender, right? That could be, you have some guys who are in competition for that. It's good competition. But when you think of most impactful, a lot of times that ends up being the center because they can cover up for everybody else. Elite rim runner, a dynamic duo with Darren Peterson. He becomes the other guy. The big question for me here, it's really 2 questions. What is it going to look like on the offensive end? Actually, 3 questions. What is it going to look like on the offensive end? I do think there was more there than you saw from like freshman Ernest Uday or Zuby Ejiofor. There still was a little more work on the pivot foot and in the post. It wasn't Hunter Dickinson. It wasn't Perry Ellis. It wasn't the Morris twins. It wasn't Darrell Arthur. But there was more there than, some of those other green, raw centers that we've seen at KU. So that does give me hope that there could be a little more there than we expect, even if it isn't, Hakeem Olajuwon down there. But what is that going to look like? What is the fouling? He had trouble with fouling last year, which most freshman big men do. And we made the comparison earlier to a younger version of Doak and Cole Aldridge, and both those guys were able to drop that in year 2 and moving forward in their career. And then is he going to play any 4 minutes? Are we going to see him at the 4 in any way, like we did a season ago for times? And how does that look if it goes? I wouldn't be as big of a fan of that, but if there's a certain matchup, I wouldn't hate it in a certain matchup. And I do think the ceiling outcome here is him being an All-American and a first-round draft pick. I think the most likely outcome, you're looking at an all-defensive player in the Big 12. You're looking at a top 3 All-Big 12 team, so first, second, or third team. Doak was third team All-Big 12 in 2018 when Kansas made the Final Four. You go back and look at his stats and see the impact and what the team did, and you're like, he was probably actually one of the top 5 to 10 players in the Big 12 that year, but they had other dudes that were eating too, and he didn't put up huge point totals. I could see that being the case for Flory too, but there is All-American status there. There is first-round potential with Flory, and I'm really excited for what he's going to look like in year 2, and I think he's going to take that big leap and be a stud for Bill Self and KU this season. All right, what about the guys rounding out that big man roster? Paul Mbiya and Bryson Tiller. That next. This episode of Locked on Jayhawks is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety pick plus awards than anyone else as of August of 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Well, Mazda brings this same attention to how we craft every model. With all-wheel drive, standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. And we're getting to that time of the year here in Kansas where, before we know it, in a month or two, it's going to be snowing, it's going to be sleeting, it's going to be raining. You're going to want, something that has all-wheel drive that can be certainly helpful once we get to that time of the year. So like our players, we sweat every detail because when we make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Today's episode of the show is also brought to you by DoorDash. Maybe your DoorDash driver will have a Mazda. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on who delivered. Powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For the Jayhawks this week, I know they lost. I know they didn't come through, whatever. But Deshaun Hanika delivered in a big way. You think about him having the first touchdown for KU. They go down 6-0. They go down the field. Hanika makes that nice jump ball catch in the end zone, gets him on the board, has a statement that says, hey, I don't care how those first 2 drives went. We're back. We're in this game. Then Hanika has the touchdown that makes it 31-28 Kansas. Gets you feeling, oh my gosh, they might win this thing. They might pull off the upset. He had a great game. Kansas kid, certainly probably meant a lot to him. And oh, look at that. We're going to talk about Deshaun Hanika later in the show because he's the number 1 graded tight end on Pro Football Focus right now in the Big 12. And just like Deshaun Hanika delivered and has been delivering for the Jayhawks, DoorDash delivers for your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season. You could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Thanks for joining us on Locked on Jayhawks. You can make Locked on College Football your second listen every day. Locked on College Basketball your second or third listen every day as well. Okay, so Flory Bidunga is the guy. He's going to be the starter. He's the guy that you look at as possibly taking that star leap. It becomes interesting, the rotation guys behind him. And I think the favorite to win those backup center minutes, because as we talked about, could Flory play 25? Could he play 28? Could he play 30 minutes per game? Regardless, that leaves a decent chunk of minutes for the backup center spot. And maybe it gets split up where Paul Mbiya is playing some, Bryson Tiller's playing some. But what we know with Bill Self is he finds the guys he trusts and he goes with them. And so I think the better odds are that one guy takes up all of those backup center minutes. And I think, like I said, the favorite would be Paul Mbiya. I'm not ruling out Bryson Tiller, though, because if you look at recruiting rankings, he was actually rated higher. Now, Mbiya is technically a couple years older, so it's not totally equivalent. And if you're looking at just like pure size and length, Tiller is very lengthy, but, with Mbiya, it's even bigger. Now, Tiller also more of a 4, I think, than a 5. But size-wise, he can play the 5. So it is interesting. I think Mbiya is the favorite for this. Mbiya is listed at 7 foot 245 by KU. LMB Young Stars had an event where he was measured 6'9" without shoes, probably 6'10", 6'11" with shoes. But the most amazing part, 7'8" wingspan. So again, that's going to be more impactful than being 7 foot. Last year in 34 games across all competitions, because he comes over from France, most of those games were playing with the Junior French League, which is not a great league, but I guess go dominate it if it's not going to be. And he did. 10.5 points per game, 8.3 rebounds per game, 2.2 blocks per game on 69% from the field. Now, if we do just look at his senior competition, 11 games played, a total of 46 minutes. So it's a very small sample size. You do essentially get if he was playing 23 minutes per game for the senior team, that would be 2 games worth of data. And basically, he put up 7 points on 3 of 6, only 1 of 9 on free throws. That's not great. 12 rebounds, though. That is good. 5 blocks and 3 steals. So very impactful defender, good rebounder, wasn't the biggest scorer. But when you look at Kansas asking for a backup big to come in for possibly 8, 10, 12 minutes in a game, can you just rebound, defend, block shots, and continue that and hit the open dunk for your team and let Darren Peterson and the guards take care of the rest? I think that's going to be very possible for Mbiya there. So when you look at his role in the team, it's the backup center. I think how good he is in relation to Bryson Tiller and how much Flory stays out of foul trouble, that's going to determine how many minutes. If Flory's in foul trouble, there's more minutes for the center position to go around. If Flory is good at staying on the court without getting in foul trouble, Flory might play closer to 28 to 30 minutes per game, and then there's less minutes for you. And then again, where are you in the pecking order with Bryson Tiller? And just for what KU's asking him to do, I don't think it's going to be like post up a ton. No, I do think, there were some decent highlights of him actually having a little post up game. He's not as raw with the post up game as you might think. So KU will try to take advantage of that, from here or there. I do think the ceiling outcome, though, is that like a guy with a 7'8" wingspan in college basketball is going to have an impact in some way when he is on the court. And what if he does come in and you're able to say that between Flory Bidunga and Paul Mbiya, you have the best 40 minutes of dunking, blocking, rebounding centers in the country? That would certainly be very impactful and be worth something. And I don't think that's something that I would rule out. I think that is actually very much a possibility for Kansas and what Mbiya complements Flory Bidunga with. I do think the most likely outcome is that there's going to be some ups and downs here. I think Mbiya is going to be a bit more of a raw prospect that, maybe he takes him a little longer to get into it in the season. Kansas doesn't really have many other, this would be a situation where if Kansas had another veteran big man on the roster that they added via the transfer portal, I might be sitting there going, you know what? I could see a world where that veteran big man just gets trusted by Bill Self more. And Mbiya is one of those guys who it's like, he comes out there, he makes a mistake, he gets pulled after a minute or two. And then the fans are in December or in January or something like, man, it would be nice if we would have given more minutes to Paul Mbiya, but Bill Self didn't want to do it because he didn't trust him. It would be nice if he was more developed by now. I could have seen that being the case. But now Bill Self's forced to play him because he doesn't have that other veteran big on the roster. So there might be some growing pains early, but I do think it's going to pay off for KU in the end because of that length and versatility. I do think it's going to still lead to good rim protection and field goal percentage. The big question to me is what is he going to do out in space? And how many teams can really space out the 5-man in college basketball? Certainly in the NBA they can. Definitely in college you can with 4 men, but you're not always going to have to with the 5-man. Can you just be a little more mobile than Hunter Dickinson? The thing he has over Hunter is, again, the 7'8" wingspan, where it's going to be so impactful inside the paint that it's going to kind of condense the court a little bit, because anybody around the key is going to see the dude who has a 7'8" wingspan, and it's going to make life easier on the rest of the defenders. So that is certainly a positive there. The other guy here is Bryson Tiller. KU lists him at 6'11", 240, previously measured 6'10", with a 7'3" wingspan. So again, all these players 7'2" plus wingspans. And last year's stats, well, the last time that Bryson Tiller played was in mid-March of 2024 in a real game. So it's been a while. But that 2024 season, between the playoffs, regular season, preseason, and non-conference, we just add up all the competition to give us the biggest sample size possible. 12.2 points per game, 26.6 minutes per game, 8.2 rebounds per game, 2.2 assists per game. So, basically 12, 8, and 2, solid numbers there in about 27 minutes. 0.6 steals per game, 1.4 blocks per game. So, 2 stocks per game. That's solid as well. The field goal percentage, though, not as solid. 43% from the floor, 19% from 3, and 70% at the foul line. The 2-point percentage is only 47.6%. That is not great. Not great, to say the least, on the 2-point percentage, especially for a big man with Bill Self. If that was like a smaller point guard, then you'd understand it a little bit more. But that is not going to endear you to Bill Self if you're missing your twos. Now, do keep in mind, though, Bryson Tiller, because he is more of a finesse four-man, is going to be taking more mid-range where it's not all going to be at the rim. If we look at just at the rim, that number would go up. But he's also taking 1.7 threes per game at under 20%. That begs the question, is that going to be something that he does at Kansas and it's going to get him a hook with Bill Self? Or is that going to be something that he improves with more time, and then all of a sudden you have a big man who can shoot threes, and that would be super valuable? But we've seen some of those guys come through for Bill Self, and he hasn't always appreciated it to the fullest, like a Carlton Bragg, like a Cam Martin, like a Zach Clements. So that'll be very interesting. You could argue that Tiller is more talented than all of those guys, but it'll be very interesting to see. I always go back to like the quote I remember reading, and maybe this is overthinking things, but like I remember there was a quote in, I think it was like an article with On3 or something, where he was talking about comparing his game, and he was comparing his game to like Jason Tatum. And I'm sitting there going, Jason Tatum's a wing. Jason Tatum's a 3-4. If that's your mindset coming into Kansas, and we'll see if Bill Self can kind of coach you out of that, that's going to rub him the wrong way. Now, at the same point in time, you're talking about a very skilled basketball player who's very long and has very high potential. So Bryson Tiller works out for Kansas, wouldn't be surprising at all. But that's kind of the question of the yin and the yang, the give and the take that's going to happen with Bill Self there. And what if he does come in? What if Paul Mbiya is, very raw and has his ups and downs, and Bill Self says, you know what? We can play a really skilled five-man who can allow us to play a 5-out offense for 8 to 10 minutes per game. Tiller has the wingspan to defend fives on the other end at 7'3", and we could play a really fun offense with Tiller at the 5 in a lot of ways with how we could spread out opposition. Do we see that in any form or fashion? Could that become a thing that KU does a little bit more? So I would find that very interesting, and I actually want to see that lineup at least here or there just to see what it looks like. I don't know if we'll actually see it. I think the more likely situation is when we see Tiller come in, we see him come in at the 4, because you don't really have a lot of the other 4 options besides Trey White. And that would give him a breather if you put Tiller in at the 4 next to Flory at the 5 or Mbiya at the 5, because you at least have a little bit of shooting with Tiller. Even if it's not as consistent 3-point range, it's more consistent out to mid-range to at least space a little bit there next to one of those guys. I would be at least interested in seeing some of that lineup here and there. And then obviously you also have Justin Cross as a walk-on just to give you an extra body there at the center position. Let's finish up. We're going to switch gears to a little KU football. Where do some of the KU football players rank among the Big 12 on Pro Football Focus? That next. Today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season's here. FanDuel's making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if it wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. You can also get futures still on the NFL season, futures still on the college football season. You can even get those early futures in on the college basketball season. I've talked about this before, but you can get Kansas going off at 20-1 odds. Actually, that went up. I'm looking at it now again. It's actually been updated. 25-1 odds now for Kansas. I can't remember a time that it's been that low outside of like in season last year. Darren Peterson also going off at plus 850 to win the Wooden Award. Those are both very interesting. That's all I'll say there. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's the Monarch. There is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface, all on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. They do the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And I love that interface. I mean, they've got easy to read graphs with they're color coded so that it's easy for simpletons like me to understand. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. Thanks for joining us on the show. Don't forget to check out Locked On College Football, Locked On College Basketball for your second and third listen every day. All right, where do some of the KU players rank through the first 3 games, which, probably not the best exercise through 3 games. A lot of teams have played an FCS team. Some of them haven't. Like, schedules are very incongruent at this point in time. But where do the KU players rank among their position in the Big 12? Let's start with quarterback. Jalen Daniels is 5th. Baron Morton, Noah Fafita, Brendan Sorsby, Rocco Beck, then Jalen in at number 5. I don't always love using the PFF grade for. I think we have so many tools for evaluating quarterbacks. PFF grade isn't necessarily. I like using it mainly for offensive line and corner. Like those are positions that I think are a little bit harder to judge. But still, that puts him in the top 5, so that's good to see. Running back Daniel Highshaw is 12th among 30 qualified running backs there, and that makes a little bit of sense after the Missouri game. Like it feels like there hasn't been enough there. We were expecting maybe a huge season from Highshaw coming into the year. It just hasn't fully clicked yet. There's been some good highlights here and there, but we'll see if he can start to kind of put it together after this Missouri game, or do we see more of LaShawn Williams kind of moving forward as he kind of continues to move past the injury and now has the bye week to heal up a little bit more. Receiver, 45 qualified, Manuel Henderson 6th. Even after that big drop against Missouri, he's had a great start to the season. Cam Pickett is not qualified. Then you have Levi Wentz at 26th, so kind of middle of the pack there. Keaton Kubeka is 38th, so some growing pains going on for him in really his first year of like playing extensively at wide receiver. At tight end, Deshaun Hanukkah, top-ranked tight end in the Big 12 right now, according to Pro Football Focus for qualified players. But overall, tight end, we had some questions about the tight end group for KU. This has been the surprise group so far with how good it's been. Hanukkah, number 1. Bowden Groen is number 9. Carson Brune is number 15. Leighton Cure is number 16. That means there's 32 qualified tight ends in the Big 12. All 4 of KU's tight ends that they're playing right now are top half tight ends in the Big 12. And if you view it as, okay, there's 16 teams in the Big 12, theoretically you want one in the top 16 and you want another in the top 32, ideally in the top 8 and the top 24 to say, okay, our first string is top half in the Big 12 among first strings. Our second string is among top half in the second string. No, Kansas just has 4 of the top 16. That is an incredible start for that tight end group for KU. Offensive line, some surprises, some good ones. Kobe Baines is the number 1 guard in the Big 12 right now for KU. Tavaki Tuikolovatu is 3rd, though he hasn't been playing as much of the 1 reps as maybe some other guys, so maybe that helps you there if you're not playing as much against Missouri. Amir Herring is 12th of 33. So even though that's been a position of rotation with Tuikolovatu and Herring, both have played well, and then Baines has been really good. At offensive tackle, same thing. Nolan Gorsica is actually 2nd. And again, when you're talking about a guy who's not playing as much in the Fresno and Missouri games, most of his grades boosted up by most of it coming against Wagner. But Cruz is still 14th of the 35. This one's tough. Calvin Clements is only 33rd of 35 qualified offensive tackles. Now, I do think a big part of that is it was the one bad game against Missouri, and it's a game he's going to have to get better. KU is counting on him to be a pillar at left tackle for the Jayhawks. He had a good first 2 games, but struggled against Missouri. We'll see how he bounces back from here. And then at center, this is one where it's like Bryce Foster had a bad game against Missouri too. He's 17th of 17 qualified centers. Good news for Kansas is the big picture would tell you Bryce Foster will get that figured out. On the defensive line, DJ Withers, Tommy Dunn, and Keenan Caldwell, 15th, 16th, 17th. Blake Harreld's only 35th, but he's coming off a great game against Missouri. I'm sure that's going to start a upward arrow for him because he's a good player. But that just kind of shows what we've thought. That like, I don't know that KU has a superstar defensive tackle, but they're going to have different guys show out each and every game. They've got a bunch of solid ones, which kind of makes sense there. Leroy Harris is 14th among 36 defensive ends. So great start for him. Dean Miller, 16th, but a little disappointing at strong defensive end right now. Alex Bray's only 27th. Justice Finkley's only 35th of 36 players. I thought he was going to have a huge season. A bit of a slow start for him there. Linebacker, Trey Lathan is 10th of 40. Bengali Kamara is 22nd of 40, and John Kamara 37th of 40. Still kind of figuring things out there. But, Kamara was graded kind of mid against Missouri. It's because he just missed a bunch of tackles. I thought he deserved a higher grade than that, but overall, you have a guy playing through an injury who's still basically a middle of the pack Big 12 linebacker, and Trey Lathan's been a top quarter linebacker so far. Corner, DJ Graham 15th, Jalen Todd 16th, and then Austin Alexander 35th of 45. And then at safety, Lyric Rawls is 10th, Mason Ellis is 15th, Saeed Gibbs only 42nd, Taylor Davis only 46th of 47. So you see a couple of weak links in the secondary right now, some other players that are playing well, but you don't have that superstar. You don't have those 2 superstars with Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson. and then you have some guys near the bottom, that would make sense why KU's given up some stuff in the passing game. Though, again, most of that derived from the one Missouri game. We'll see how that kind of equals out. And KU does have a lot of talent, just young talent in the secondary that I'm sure will get it figured out and will get better as the season goes on. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time with LOJ.